to the Fort Worth Sister Cities International mayoral candidate conversation. Today we will be hearing from City Councilwoman Ann Zadeh. I'm going to give a short overview of sister cities, and while I'm doing that, if you think of any questions you would like to ask Councilwoman Zadeh, you can put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, or anytime during her presentation. Please put your questions there, and we will try to get to them at the end of the program. Our former chairwoman of the board of directors, Veronica Chavez Law, will join us for the Q&A and moderate those questions with Councilwoman Zadeh. So I hope you will sit back and learn a lot from today's presentations. And remember to go out and vote on May 1st. Councilwoman Zadeh is pretty familiar with Fort Worth Sister Cities International, having served on the board on the city council. The city council, each representative is a liaison with one of our sister cities, and Councilwoman Zadeh is that liaison with Budapest, Hungary. She traveled there with us a couple of years ago. She may even mention that in her talk with you. But she's very familiar with us, and I want to also educate anyone in the audience who is not familiar or wants to learn a little bit more before we get started. So, Councilwoman, you already know this, but Fort Worth Sister Cities manages the International Sister Cities program for the city of Fort Worth, and we've been doing this for over 35 years. We have a small contract with the city of Fort Worth to manage the program and are housed in the City Hall Annex building. Our mission is to promote Fort Worth globally and enrich our local community through international education, exchange, and commerce. And we do it in a varied ways. Now, some other organizations in Fort Worth have stepped back from a global role this last year, but we want to do more. We want to increase our presence in this arena to become a center for international relations for the city of Fort Worth. You know, we focus much of our effort on student education through travel experiences and virtual educational opportunities. And we are very proud of our student participants who are both racially and economically diverse. We bring great value to the city of Fort Worth through deep, long-standing relationships with international leaders, access to local, internationally focused resources, subject matter expertise in protocols, international relations, experiential global education. We have access to international networks, including embassies, NGOs, the State Department, and others. We've got committed volunteers. We're a powerful, adaptable, effective program-based organization that is now measuring our programs with outcome-based measurements that is supported by evaluation and research. We've got personal relationships, friendships with countries all over the world, and a long history of being the best sister city program in the nation, 10 times more than any other city in the country. But now, enough about us. Let us get to our first councilwoman to address us, City Councilwoman Ann Zadeh. Ann has been a resident of Fort Worth for over 30 years. She has been an American Institute of Certified Planner since 1992. She has a master's degree in city and regional planning from the University of Texas at Arlington and a bachelor's degree in environmental studies, policy, and planning from the University of California, Santa Cruz. She served on the Zoning Commission for 6 years, and in 2014, she was elected District 9 City Council Representative. And if you know her well, or have been involved with her in any of the programs here in Fort Worth, we call her our transportation nerd. She knows everything there is about transportation and is an advocate for that. So let me introduce you all to City Councilwoman Ann Zadeh.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was looking there to make sure that I didn't start speaking before the mute button was disabled. So I see that I am now on the screen and I don't see a mute button anymore. So I think we've got this under control. Thank you, May. I really appreciate the introduction. I am Ann Zadeh, and I have served on the Fort Worth City Council for 7 years. I was as May introduced in my background of my education, I am a certified city planner and got my master's degree here in Texas at the University of Texas at Arlington. And right after receiving that degree, I started working for a small consulting firm, and all of our clients were small cities. So I have a lot of experience working for cities. Those small cities throughout the Metroplex didn't have their own in-house planning staff, and they would turn to us to review developers' plans and make recommendations to zoning commissions and city councils about decisions of development and growth and redevelopment and zoning and subdivision regulations and all kinds of nerdy planning stuff that probably we don't need to go into in too much detail today. But I did that for a number of years, and then I spent a great deal of time focused on my family. I have 2 sons who are now 19 and 23 years old, but I was a full-time stay-at-home mom for a great number of years. Was really had an opportunity to spend a lot of time with my boys doing that. But speaking of my boys, back in 1997, we had our first interaction with Sister Cities when my husband went on a trip to Reggio Emilia with Sister Cities, taking a soccer team that he was coaching at the time. And I was pregnant with my son, Michael. We didn't have children of our own, but he had been coaching for some time, and he went on this trip with Sister Cities, and I was possibly going to go into labor while he was gone. So I went on bed rest while he was gone so that I made it through until his return. But that was our first experience with Sister Cities, and that was being able to be a participant with young folks traveling to another country and participating and competing in sports in that country. And that was just a fabulous experience, both for my husband and for the boys that he took on that trip. More recently, I, as the liaison to Budapest, traveled with Sister Cities to Budapest, and we also went to Prague. And that was just a wonderful experience. And many of the things that May just mentioned about what you all do on your trips, I was able to experience firsthand on that trip with my husband, which was wonderful. But here locally at home, I have been involved with Sister Cities and some of the youth programs. The youth ambassadors come to City Council every time they travel and get their swearing in to be travel ambassadors for the city of Fort Worth when they travel to the various countries. And then also I've worked with some of the recognitions of the youth that have participated in the educational opportunities that you all have that just incredibly enrich the lives of the young people. And I run into adults all the time who had that experience in their youth and continue to reflect on it, and it informs the adults that they have become. So the relationships that you all have had with young people for many, many years have resulted in adults in this city that are just doing incredible things as they continue to add to the vibrancy and prosperity of our city. So I talked a little bit about my background and my education, and I have also done in all of the years that I've lived in Fort Worth, which my husband and I moved here. He moved here for law school, and I moved here when we got married. So when people ask me what brought you to Fort Worth, the answer is love brought me to Fort Worth. My husband and I, when we got married, I came here planning to continue my education. He already had a job working as an attorney in Fort Worth. And so when we moved here, I continued with my master's degree in city and regional planning. And I started serving in my own neighborhood. So being involved and engaged in neighborhoods and in communities that I've lived in has been something that has been a part of my upbringing and background from when I was a small child. And when I start to share with people things that I did when I was very, very young, they think, oh my gosh, this is going to be a really long, involved story about where Ann came from. But it really informs the service that I have gone on to do in this community. So I like to share with people that I grew up at a Quaker boarding school in Northern California where my parents were on the faculty. And Quakers make decisions by coming to consensus. So the experience that I had in that Quaker boarding school, meeting with the people that we lived in community with and making decisions about what that community would look like and how it would function, has informed all of the decisions that I've made in communities that I've lived in ever since. So when we first moved into our home here in the Bluebonnet Hills area in the early 90s, I joined the neighborhood association, and my husband and I both played leadership roles in our neighborhood association and started doing that from the very beginning. And so when I decided to run for council in 2014, when the previous council member stepped down, I started out by reaching out to neighborhood associations because that I had done. So reaching out to those associations, introducing myself. And in the time that I have served on the Fort Worth City Council, I have continued those relationships, being active out in the community and involving myself with neighborhood associations in people's lives where they are in their daily lives, and not requiring folks to come to City Hall to interact with me or to come to a council meeting or those more formal settings. So I continue to do that through my service and would absolutely continue to do that as mayor. In regards to my relationship in looking at my thoughts regarding international relations, that's very much informed by the relationship that I've had with sister cities up to this point, and the amazing programs that you all have put in place, and the observations that I've been able to have on the way that kids have been benefited by that. And then traveling with May, I absolutely had the experience of learning about cultures and customs and ways of interacting with folks in order to build and grow those relationships. And as May also pointed out, I'm an avid supporter of public transportation. And on that trip to Budapest, I had the opportunity to see some really incredible public transportation systems that exist there, both really, really old transportation systems, one of the world's oldest subways, and also some really very new and high-tech installations of transit systems that have come into place since the funding has become available to places like Budapest to add very technologically advanced transit systems as well. So just the whole gamut there. So I look at what has been made available to me through my relationships with sister cities, and know that those kind of things can be just fostered and encouraged and grown. And as I mentioned to May before this program got started, the first question that I was asked to talk to you all about today was my thoughts regarding Fort Worth's place in international relations. And then the questions that I think that we're going to get into going forward start to talk about some of those things. So I don't want to step too much on the toes of the questions that are going to be asked, but in looking at why I'm running to be your next mayor, I have really enjoyed the service that I've been able to provide in the 7 years that I've served as the City Council representative for District 9. And District 9 is a unique district in that it involves the core of the city and many of the older historic neighborhoods around the core of the city. And it has a very diverse population, from older neighborhoods to more economically advantaged neighborhoods to neighborhoods that struggle economically. And I've had the opportunity to represent that broad spectrum of folks. But I have not limited myself to the residents of District 9. I very often get calls from folks who live outside the district who say, you know, I'm having a hard time getting in touch with someone, or I don't know how to find the answers to these questions, or just being out in the community. Those questions have naturally come to me, and I've been able to connect people to the resources and services that they need looking at the city going forward. So I've really appreciated that opportunity and would continue to do that in my work going forward as the mayor. I have had a very strong relationship also with Visit Fort Worth, and we also have our relationship with DFW Airport. And so those are things that I think tie into the mission and the goals that Sister Cities has, and kind of one of the things that I've noticed is that there's a lot of passionate people in Fort Worth who have a desire to improve things in some arena of their life that they've decided is important to them. And oftentimes people will go out and start a new organization and start to try to implement the things they would like to see happen. But there are so many organizations doing so many things that actually are, if they collaborated together more carefully and more thoroughly, they could all create outcomes that would be much more beneficial in all of their desires that they're trying to create. So looking at what Sister Cities does, looking at what Visit Fort Worth does, looking at our ownership of DFW Airport, looking at all of the ISD, Fort Worth ISD and educational opportunities. And I know that Sister Cities is doing a lot of this work, but as we talked about previous to the getting on the call, May was saying that she was going to give a little update and an overview of what Sister Cities does, and was saying how she knows that I know this already, but these opportunities to have these forums where you can spread that message, you're touching other people who maybe didn't know that these things were available and going on. And so those are some things that I think we should focus on expanding and getting the word out better. So I'm going to wrap up my remarks. I think that I've touched on kind of my background, my education, my service. My reason for running is basically I love Fort Worth. I want Fort Worth to be a city where everyone who lives here, works here, comes to visit here is welcome and comfortable. And I want my boys who are now away at college, which I think is a spectacular experience for them to be able to have. I'm glad that they've chosen to travel broadly. They've traveled more in their lives than I did in mine. And I think that has informed the young men that they have become. But I would love for them to see Fort Worth as a community that they would like to come back to. And I think after seeing some other places and the diversity that's out there and the resources that are out there in some of the other communities that they've visited, they'd like to see some of those things here. And some of those areas are things that we're still working on improving, transit being one of them, and equitable racial equity being another. I think those are some topics that all the organizations in our city are eager to improve and make better. And I think we have ample opportunity to do that with the right leadership in place. And I look forward to being in that role going forward. So I don't know if I'm supposed to pitch it back to you all to go into the questions that you had set up to talk a little bit about, or there we go. Hi, Veronica. I think you're muted.
Okay, thank you so much. I know just from what you said that you're very knowledgeable about Fort Worth Sister Cities, and so I'll just kind of go through the questions, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on your agenda or priorities for why you're running for mayor, and then weave into that, you know, how promoting Fort Worth internationally would be part of that agenda and what your goals are related to that.
So I think that the experiences that I've had thus far, being able to travel and being able to also talk a little bit about businesses traveling with sister cities, I think that's something that has kind of been more promoted in the last few years. And I would love to see some of the local businesses that are women-owned businesses or businesses owned by Black and Brown individuals to be able to travel more with sister cities and promote those types of businesses. I think there's a lot of effort going into that right now. And I think the opportunity to have those diverse businesses be able to be plugged into sister cities and travel to those other countries. And then also when we bring folks to Fort Worth, connecting them with those business owners and individuals in our community, I think would be one of the priorities for me in what I could see the city helping sister cities promote going forward, and answering that kind of question. I think that, you know, this idea of being the center, the hub of international relations for the city of Fort Worth, I think that is a laudable goal. And I think it's absolutely something that the city could use assistance with. I mean, most of the city's staff day-to-day activities are about delivering services to the residents that live here in Fort Worth. And so an idea of having a partnership, which we already have, but as May has pointed out, we've gotten that Best Sister Cities organization 10 times. And so each time you all have come to the city and asked for additional funding, we say, you all are doing such a fantastic job. But with these other ideas of a broader reach that you are looking at doing, I think supporting that broader reach, because knowing that the benefits of you all having those broader reaches will be beneficial to the city as well. So being a bigger partner on the city side with the efforts that you guys are doing in that expanded role, I think would be a great priority for the leadership of the city of Fort Worth to have going forward.
Great. Well, I know you're aware of all the programs that Fort Worth Sister Cities offers. So a couple things, and I'm going to kind of weave a couple questions together here. What are your thoughts about using our programs to address some of the diversity goals in Fort Worth? And then also, you talked about the Center for International Relations. Do you have any thoughts of how we can do additional things that we may not be doing to sort of become that center?
I think that the first thing that you were talking about having these opportunities, these programs for a broader group of students, possibly. I know you're doing some scholarships and stuff, but looking back at what my children had the opportunity to do, traveling internationally and hosting international students. As you know, when we first decided to do that, we were a little bit, oh, that's going to be kind of scary, or how is that going to be with our daily lives? And it was the most enriching, wonderful experience that we could possibly imagine. And so I remember hearing from other families that did it before we did it, and them telling us, you're going to love it. It's going to be great. And just getting over that hump. So I think expanding that program even more to allow it to be available to as many youth as possible. I know that my kids were very fortunate to have the ability to do those programs. We were very fortunate to be able to host people in our home. And if there's things that Sister Cities can do to support that to a broader reach of families and individual children, I think that would be a really fantastic way to do that. I think this goal of being the international hub for international relations is something that goes back to what I was talking about of tying different organizations together that are doing work that touch on that. So like our chamber and our economic development team, and then Sister Cities as an organization, and Visit Fort Worth is, all of those groups are touching international in some form or fashion. But what tends to happen is if you don't have somebody collaborating all those efforts, then people either duplicate efforts or something falls through the cracks. So for example, with our Tarrant County Homeless Coalition, that's kind of an umbrella to bring everybody together. And I could see Sister Cities being an umbrella for anyone who's touching on international relations at all, to be able to kind of come under and then be connected to other people who are doing that work as well, to try to collaborate more and have less duplication of efforts and less things falling through the cracks, and give a little direction to how people could be more helpful and informed to help Sister Cities in their efforts and their goals and their mission.
Great. That's certainly exactly what we want to be. So I think it's probably a good time to go ahead and let May ask some questions that are coming in from the audience.
Absolutely.
Does that sound good? Okay.
In fact, we have a couple of interesting ones, and they're all anonymous, so I have no idea who asked these questions. The first one is, numerous other cities totally fund their Sister Cities program. Do you ever see Fort Worth doing this? Would you be opposed to it if you are mayor? And I did not plant this question.
Sure you didn't. No, I mean, I'm not opposed to looking at any ideas for funding of programs that are wonderful programs that are doing good things in our city. It's always a balance. We're always having less funding available for the multiple things that we want to do. I've struggled with finding funding for transportation, and that's definitely something that I'm always looking for other partnerships and ways of doing. So of course I would never be I would never say flat out, no, I don't think that the city should ever fund anymore, or expand their funding or increase their funding. I think that there's always a conversation to be had about those things and priorities. Speaking of the transportation thing, I do want to say that when people come here from other places, they often come from places that have world-class public transportation, and they are expecting something like that when they get here. And I've seen folks struggle with some of our transit here. I woke up this morning to find out that the zip zone on the south side has been expanded to include over here. And now I can call a zip zone and I can get to the south side and I can get to West 7th. And so I think we're making improvements as we go along, but definitely always something, I think that it can be a tool to inform folks of why we should have a world-class transit system. If we're encouraging people to come here from other countries, and that's an expectation that they might have. If businesses want to come here from other places where they have those resources, that would be a good reason to enhance that service here so that we can continue to attract that kind of business and visitors.
I agree with you. I can remember when we finally got the airport, connection together.
TexRail.
People were like, oh my gosh, we can get from the airport to downtown Fort Worth. So yes, more work to be done there. The next one was, there are so many neighborhoods being revitalized and many others are forgotten. What is your plan as mayor to make sure all neighborhoods have nice sidewalks and nice roads to drive on?
So this is something that I talk about quite often, because we have been a city that has very much kind of a squeaky wheel gets the grease delivery system of those types of resources for many, many years. And thankfully, I can point to the last 6 and 7 years that I have been in office. I can't take full credit for all of this because there's been some others at the table as well. But David Cook, when he came in as city manager, started to have our departments look at the things that needed to be taken care of, the aging infrastructure and neighborhoods that in the past have been left behind because that squeaky wheel gets the grease delivery system, and trying to make up for some of that with our neighborhood funding that we've done the last 6 years. So starting with Stop 6 and Ash Crescent and Northside and then Rosemont, and now this coming up year, Como, we have done a significant investment in trying to make those improvements in those neighborhoods, but that definitely needs to be stepped up because we're not going to get everybody caught up to an acceptable level of those types of improvements and services if we don't step that up a little bit. So I think that continuing to prioritize based on the data of the conditions of those areas and the age of that infrastructure, and making those investments through our bond packages and through our pay-go yearly budget in an equitable way, looking at these things through the lens of equity. Many of those neighborhoods are neighborhoods that were redlined years and years and years ago, and the ramifications and the repercussions of that still exist today. So these are all things that we need to address and do better going forward.
Here's another anonymous one. This is not about sister cities, but is the city's plan for the homeless tents that are all around I-35 and Lancaster. I worry that we are becoming LA's tent city.
Well, I know that there has been an uptick in folks that are experiencing homelessness. COVID has not done any favors in that area, and our shelters have also had to reduce capacity during COVID in order to make sure that people are COVID safe. But we have stepped up in a great way to try to address that. When folks are out on the street experiencing homelessness, we have a Hope Squad that is part of the Fort Worth Police Department, so that it's not just your patrol officers that are going out and making contact with folks. The Hope Squad also is, or the Hope Team is connected with that organization that I mentioned before, Tarrant County Homeless Coalition, that has all kinds of street teams and folks that are working to try to make contact with people experiencing homelessness to provide them contacts to get them in touch with services, and hopefully to get them in touch with the ability to find housing so that they are no longer having to live on the street. There is a lack of permanent supportive housing that is sometimes necessary for folks experiencing homelessness, whether they're suffering from mental illness or other problems that make it difficult for them to maintain housing even when they get housing. So that permanent supportive housing is something that we have increased recently with some COVID dollars, purchasing an extended stay hotel and turning that into permanent supportive housing. And then also just affordable housing. We have a lack of affordable housing. So continuing to educate folks about what affordable housing is and the policies of the city to provide mixed income housing that is dispersed throughout the city so that we're not having concentrations of poverty in one location that can be detrimental to adjacent homes in that area. So just when someone comes to you and says that they are proposing to have some affordable housing bought, I just encourage folks to fully get informed and educated as to what that looks like. It's housing that my children would probably need in order to move back to Fort Worth and be able to afford an apartment or a first home when that time comes. So looking at expanding both permanent supportive housing and And affordable housing, I think, is a good way to address that. But those teams are doing their outreach in as compassionate a way as possible, reaching out and trying to make those connections. Not everyone wants to avail themselves of the services that are available, but know that there are folks on the ground working to try to address that situation every day.
That's a difficult issue to tackle, so good to know that. Ebony Jones wants you to share with us pillars in the community who will influence your decision-making and approach to community needs.
So when I never thought that I would run for public office. This is not something that I went to school to do. I did not think of being a politician or anything like that. My first decision to run for city council was basically other people telling me that I should do this, because of my knowledge and my background and my education and my knowledge about how cities work and function, and how sharing with my friends and family and neighbors about how to get things done in the city. People said, you should be on the city council. So having a perfectly wonderful city council representative at the time, I wasn't interested in running against him, but when he stepped down is when I decided to run. And the same thing when I decided to run for mayor. I reached out to people who had been encouraging me to do this for a number of years and said, okay, I'm ready to do this. Do you think that I should? So I don't have individuals that you might recognize their names necessarily. There are people like that I totally respect, who've been doing great work in the community, that I absolutely listen to, but I listen to everyone. And when I make decisions, I go to the people that are most impacted and I get feedback from them. Now, can you make everyone happy when you listen to what everyone has to say? Obviously not. You're making decisions where one group of people might be totally in favor and another group of people might be totally opposed. But I can guarantee that I will definitely be reaching out and getting input and information and positions from as many people as possible, and making sure that people don't just feel like they've been heard, but they've actually been heard. And those will inform decisions that I make about the future of Fort Worth and the vision that I have for Fort Worth, and making sure that it aligns with the vision that the folks that live here and work here and visit here have for the future of Fort Worth.
You got a lot of people you've got to reach out to. Fort Worth is getting so big. We have one more question, anonymous question. Will you continue to support, expand, and maintain the bike lanes in Fort Worth?
I am in favor of a multimodal transportation system. So bike lanes are a part of that. I definitely understand that people need to get places in their cars. People need to get places on their feet. People need to get places on bikes. They need to be able to take public transportation, and it's a balancing act to provide all of those things in a safe manner. So I've done a lot of work over the years that I've served on the city council on safe street initiatives, making sure folks are safe in their neighborhoods, making sure that you can get places that you want to get to in your neighborhoods in a safe manner. And we've had to go back and make some improvements in some areas where we have kind of redesigned roads in a very car-centric way, where people speed faster than they should, in order that making it unsafe for other modes of transit. So I definitely am in favor of a multimodal transportation system that provides opportunities and options for people and doesn't force anyone into any one of those modes.
All right. Well, that looks like all of the questions I've got on our screen. So I'll go ahead and wrap this up. And number one, thank you so much, Councilwoman Zadeh. And I should not call you.
No, please, Ann.
Well, we all do. We appreciate all of your wonderful comments about sister cities and really the need for, I love that idea, as you explained, of that umbrella of all the organizations that we're already working with. But you're right, if there's not just one organization prioritizing international, then it sometimes does get left behind, or the duplication happens. So appreciate those comments and your total support. The one question no one asked you, and I'll ask you real quick, is if you're elected mayor, are you going to take us to the new City Hall building? Will we have a corner office where we can,
on the top floor,
welcome visitors in a really nice way, rather than just police with the the wand. So
Well, I know that there is a committee put together determining where people are going to be in the future city hall. I would hate to make a promise to you today without the input.
As long as we're in the building and we're there and we have that close connection with the city, I think we'll be fine with it. But we do want to be a service to the city in any way possible. So thank you for all those good remarks. Veronica, thank you so much for serving as our moderator. For those of you who want to attend our next conversation, it will be with Maddie Parker on March 23rd at 3 o'clock. After that, March 24, we'll have Deborah Peoples, and we have 3 others after that. So if you're want to see the entire schedule, Danielle is always sending that out as a reminder. So stay tuned for those. If we don't see you at any of the other conversations, go out and vote on May 1st. May 1st, Election Day, for whomever is your choice. That's how we make our voices heard, of course. And again, thank you, Ann, so much. And we will see you all later then.
If I could just add one more thing. If anybody wants to find out more information about my campaign, they can visit www.annzadeh.com, and there's platform issues there, and we're adding to those as we hear back from people about what's important to them, and then just updating and having additional information on that website as well as we go forward. And if you wish to support me, you can do that there as well.
Absolutely. All righty then. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.